Kids are supposed to be innocent, so we often think that only adults are capable of committing the most heinous crimes. Well, think again, because this spine-tingling video you're about to watch delves into the dark world of juvenile crimes, showing a side many wouldn't have believed existed. Brace yourself, as this video about kids whose crimes were so brutal they were tried as adults reveals in its entirety the blurred lines between innocence and malevolence. 1. Mary Bell.
The first time I met Mary Bell, I felt that something bad could happen involving this girl.
A monster, a psychopath, and a brutal killer. These were the words used to describe the 10-year-old killer who murdered 2 young boys. Mary Bell was born on May 26, 1957, to a 17-year-old local prostitute in Corbridge, Northumberland, England. She was a neglected child who suffered abuse at the hands of her mother, who allegedly allowed several of her clients to sexually abuse Mary Bell in a sadomasochistic manner. It wasn't surprising that she grew to be a disturbed child who often portrayed violent and unpredictable behavior, which included sudden mood swings and chronic bedwetting.
I believe that people have the propensity to be bad when they are born, and Mary Bell was one of these people.
Even before she committed the murders she would be known for, Mary also exhibited serial killer tendencies, as she attempted to block the trachea of a young girl with sand and often attempted to strangle her classmates or playmates. She frequently spent time with 13-year-old Norma Joyce Bell, a neighbor's daughter. The two were not related, and the latter would become a key witness in the trial against Mary. On May 25, 1968, Mary Bell committed her first murder by strangling 4-year-old Martin Brown in an upstairs bedroom of an abandoned house located at 85 St. Margaret's Road, Scotswood, Newcastle, upon Tyne. There was no visible sign of violence on his body, but there were specks of blood and foam around his mouth. However, no one ever thought that the young boy's killer was a fellow child. On July 31, 1968, the body of 3-year-old Brian Howe was found between 2 large concrete blocks. He had numerous puncture wounds, a partially mutilated genital, and an attempt to carve the letter M on his stomach was visible. After investigations, Mary and Norma were picked as the prime suspects in the murder cases, and on August 4th, Norma confessed that Mary had been the one to murder the boys. However, Mary claimed that they were murdered by Norma. Both girls were formally charged on August 7th, 1968, and Mary was alleged to have responded with the words, "That's all right by me." The trial began on December 5th, 1968, and both girls, who were tried as adults, pleaded not guilty to the charges. On December 17th, a jury reached a verdict, and Mary Bell was charged with manslaughter of both boys on the grounds of diminished responsibility, while Norma was acquitted of all charges. She was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, which was an indefinite sentence of imprisonment. At the time of her conviction, Mary Bell was just 11 years and 6 months, which makes her Britain's youngest serial killer to date. 2. Lionel Tate. Next up is the case of Lionel Tate, who at 13 was convicted of first-degree murder for the battering death of 6-year-old Tiffany Eunick. Deweese Eunick Paul, Tiffany's mom, was friends with Lionel's mother, Kathleen Grosset Tate, after they moved to Broward County, Florida. The duo would help each other take care of the children. Lionel Tate, 12 years old at the time, was unusually large for his age, weighing 166 pounds, and was nearly 6 feet tall. However, he didn't appear to be violent and had played with Tiffany, who was just 48 pounds, several times before her murder. On July 28, 1999, Lionel's mother was the one watching the kids. She worked as a Florida State Trooper and was scheduled to work an overnight shift. On that day, she fed the children and then went upstairs to take a nap while they played downstairs. 45 minutes later, Lionel went to tell his mother that she was not breathing. She called Tiffany's mother to tell her that her daughter wasn't breathing. By the time the child was rushed to the hospital, she was pronounced dead. An autopsy report revealed that her legs, neck, and feet were seriously bruised. Her skull was fractured, and she had a lacerated liver, fractured rib, and a swollen brain. These injuries were deemed similar to those she would have sustained by falling from a 3-story building. That was when Lionel became a suspect in her murder. He was immediately charged with first-degree murder and was to be tried as an adult.
To prosecute Lionel Tate in the state of Florida in the juvenile court system meant that Lionel was facing 6 to 9 months in juvenile detention. That's 1 month for every year of this little girl's life. And in my estimation, that was not an appropriate sentence. And that was not justice for this little girl.
On January 25, 2001, the jury unanimously convicted Lionel Tate of first-degree murder. And just days after his 14th birthday, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Incarceration for your natural life.
This controversial verdict made Lionel Tate the youngest American citizen to ever be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, even though it was eventually overturned. 3. Eric Smith.
So you find the defendant guilty of murder in the second degree?
Yes.
Is that unanimous?
Yes.
13-year-old Eric Smith had just been found guilty of second-degree murder after he tortured and murdered a 4-year-old child, Derek Joseph Roby, in Steuben County, New York. On August 2, 1993, Derek Roby was allowed to walk to the local park day camp near his family's home in Savona. His mother had been so busy with his crying younger brother that she allowed him to go alone. Smith, who was 13, was riding his bicycle to the same camp when he saw Roby on the way. He lured the younger child into a nearby wooded area where he strangled Roby and dropped a large rock on his head. Like that wasn't bad enough, he raped the younger child with a stick and then poured Kool-Aid into Roby's open wounds. At 11 a.m., Roby's mother went to pick up her son from the camp but was told that he never arrived. She immediately contacted the police, and after 4 hours of investigation, his body was found. The cause of death was determined to be blunt trauma to the head, along with contributing asphyxia. Eric Smith was interviewed by investigators, and he admitted to seeing Roby while he rode his bike to the camp, even describing what he wore and his lunch bag. However, when he was taken to the scene of the murder and was asked to reenact what he witnessed, it soon became clear that he couldn't have seen all of that from the distance he claimed to have been at. 6 days later, he confessed to the murder of Derek Roby and even provided details of the murder. On August 9, 1993, following his arrest, the nation was shocked that the perpetrator of such a brutal crime was none other than a freckled-faced, red-haired boy of 13. On September 2, 1993, a grand jury indicted Smith on a second-degree murder charge, and he was to be tried as an adult. Smith pleaded not guilty to the charge, and a defense psychiatrist testified to diagnosing him with intermittent explosive disorder and could not be held criminally responsible for the crime. However, prosecutors rejected the insanity defense, arguing that he was not suffering from any mental disorder at the time of the murder. On August 16, 1994, the jury found the 14-year-old Eric Smith guilty of second-degree murder, and on November 7th was sentenced to the maximum sentence for juvenile murderers, which was 9 years to life. He was eventually granted parole in October 2021 after serving 27 years in prison and was officially released in February 2022. 4. Robert Thompson and John Venables.
So we walked up to him and we were walking around with him and I took his hand.
And whose idea was it to walk towards it?
Mine.
Was it?
Then it was Robert's idea to kill him.
Robert Thompson and John Venables were both 10 years old when they murdered 2-year-old James Patrick Bulger in the most gruesome manner. On February 12, 1993, Thompson and Venables, known for regularly playing trance from their school, were at the New Strand Shopping Center in Bootle shoplifting items and looking for a young target. The duo had plans of abducting a child, leading him to a busy road alongside the shopping center and pushing him into traffic. Unfortunately, their victim would be 2-year-old James Bulger, who was at the mall with his mother. For a brief moment, she let go of his hand to pay for her shopping, and then he went missing. CCTV footage showed Thompson and Venables leading him by the hand out of the shopping center by 3:42 p.m. The two took Bulger to the Leeds and Liverpool Canal, where they dropped him on his head and attempted to throw him into the water.
And we went outside to the canal.
What for?
Don't know, we said let's throw him in the water. He was persuading him, he said kneel down and let's look at the water and all that, but he wouldn't. Because when we wouldn't get him down, Robert kicked him up and threw him on the floor, and that's where he got his bump on his head.
Even though the boys encountered several adults, no one suspected something wrong was happening or attempted to alert the authorities. Thompson and Venables eventually took Bulger to a railway line where they threw paint into his left eye, placed batteries in his mouth and allegedly in his anus, stomped him, and threw bricks at him. They then proceeded to drop a 10 kg railway fish plate on the younger child, laid him on the railway tracks, and placed stones on him to make his death seem like an accident. Bulger's severed body would be discovered by a group of kids 2 days later. He had been cut in half by a train and suffered 42 injuries in total. On February 18, 1993, both boys were arrested, and on February 20th were charged with the murder of James Bulger. They were to be tried as adults, and on November 1, 1993, the adult trial began at Sessions House, Preston. Both boys, now 11 at the time, were found guilty of murder and abduction on November 24, 1993, making them the youngest convicted murderers of the 20th century in Britain. The jury recommended a minimum sentence of 8 years, while Lord Chief Justice Lord Taylor of Gosforth recommended that the boys serve a minimum of 10 years. However, a petition signed by nearly 280,000 people recommended that Thompson and Venables serve a minimum of 15 years, and it was successful. 5. Jordan Brown.
How young is too young for a child to go to trial for murder and possibly prison for life? Jordan Brown is a 12-year-old Pennsylvania boy accused of killing his father's pregnant fiancée, and he could become one of the youngest Americans ever to face life in prison.
Jordan Brown was just 11 years old when he was charged as an adult in the fatal shooting of his father's fiancée. 26-year-old Kenzie Marie Hook was 8 months pregnant when she was shot in the back of the head on the morning of February 20th, 2009. Prior to her murder, the Pennsylvania family seemed to be living a happy life. Christopher Brown was engaged to Hauck, who had 2 daughters, 4-year-old Adeline and 7-year-old Janessa. Along with Jordan, the family seemed to get along just fine, and everyone eagerly awaited the arrival of the new baby until that tragic morning. Christopher had left for work while Hauck and the kids got ready for the day. Janessa and Jordan left for school together while 4-year-old Adeline stayed behind with her mother. 45 minutes later, Adeline was found crying in the doorway of their New Beaver, Pennsylvania home by tree cutters. Hauck and her unborn baby were found dead with Hauck suffering a gunshot to her head. She had been shot by a youth model Harrington and Richardson 20-gauge shotgun, which was a Christmas gift from Christopher to his son Jordan. Upon further investigation, the police found a spent shotgun shell near the path where Brown walked with Janessa on their way to school. He was immediately arrested and taken into custody. Although investigators didn't find DNA clues or fingerprints that linked Jordan to the crime, they believed he murdered out of jealousy. It didn't help that despite interviewing Janessa 4 times, they only recorded the part where she changed her entire story from seeing nothing unusual to saying she had seen Brown with the shotgun that morning. Brown, on the other hand, insisted that he was innocent and had seen a black truck with a man near his house. Hauck had filed a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend Adam Harvey, who owned a black truck and had threatened to kill her and her family. Still, there was no evidence linking him to the crime, so he was let off the hook. Jordan, on the other hand, kept adding more details to this admission, which made his story seem inconsistent. Subsequently, he was to be tried as an adult. On April 13, 2012, the jury found Jordan guilty of first-degree murder, and he was to spend the rest of his life in prison without parole. Fortunately, he was ordered to spend time in juvenile detention. After more than 7 years in juvenile detention, Jordan was released in 2016, and his charges were overturned in 2018 since there was no concrete evidence that he committed the crime. 6. Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier.
Anissa Weier and Morgan Geyser are accused of stabbing their classmate 19 times to please a fictional character.
Also known as the Slenderman Girls. The strange case of Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier shocked the United States and the state of Wisconsin. On May 31, 2014, 12-year-old Morgan Geyser, along with her friends Anissa Weier and Peyton Isabella Leutner, made their way to Davids Park, a wooded area near Waukesha, Wisconsin. During a game of hide-and-seek, Geyser and Weier pinned Peyton, also known as Bella, to the ground, and Geyser proceeded to stab her 19 times in the arms, legs, and torso. She used a 5-inch long blade which inflicted 2 wounds to major organs. One missed a major artery of her heart by less than a millimeter. The other went through her diaphragm, cutting into her stomach and liver. After committing the dastardly act, Geyser and Weier then told Bella, who was still conscious, to wait while they got help, but they never got back. Fortunately, she was found by a cyclist who immediately contacted 911.
So are you with this 12-year-old female?
Yes, she says she's having trouble breathing. She said she was stabbed multiple times.
5 hours later, Geyser and Weier were apprehended near Interstate 94 at Steinhoffel's furniture store. The girls, carrying the knife they used in a bag, said they wanted to meet Slenderman at his mansion in Nicollet National Forest. They were arrested, and Geyser was charged with attempted first-degree homicide, and Weier was charged with attempted second-degree homicide. Peyton, on the other hand, miraculously survived the brutal stabbing. Geyser displayed little to no empathy, and Weier appeared genuinely guilty for stabbing the victim. Due to the severity of their crimes, both girls were to be tried as adults. In 2017, Weier pleaded guilty to being a party to attempted second-degree homicide, but she was found not guilty by reason of mental illness. Anissa Weier was eventually sentenced to 25 years to life, with 3 years of locked confinement and involuntary treatment in a state psychiatric institute. Morgan Geyser, on the other hand, was given the maximum sentence of 40 years to life. She was to remain locked in a mental institution until she showed complete resolution of mental system or until she was 53 years old. 7. Catherine and Curtis Jones.
Catherine Jones was only 13 and her brother Curtis 12 when they shot and killed Nicole Spites in 1999. The plan was to kill Spites as well as 2 family members. The reason? The youngsters were being sexually abused by one of those family members.
Catherine and Curtis Jones were two very young children who would go on to commit one of the most vicious crimes in modern American history, making them one of the youngest convicted children in U.S. history. On January 6, 1999, 29-year-old Sonia Nicole Spites was sitting at the dining room table doing a 500-piece jigsaw puzzle when the then 13-year-old Catherine used a 9mm handgun to shoot her in the torso. She immediately dropped the gun after it discharged. Curtis, who was 12 at the time, picked it up and emptied the remaining bullet into Spites. They then tried to make the crime scene look like a robbery gone wrong and fled into the woods before they were apprehended. Everyone had the same question: why did these children commit such a violent crime? Police had a simple motive. At one time, they had been a trio, sort of like the Three Amigos. Now they were a foursome, and they were resentful and jealous of the fact. However, the reason behind the murder was a rather sad one. Both children were being sexually abused by a family relative who lived with them. Even when they reported what was happening to their father and his girlfriend, Spites, they did nothing. That was when both kids began plotting the murders of their father, the family relative, and Spites. Spites was the first target because the kids believed she did nothing to stop the abuse. In a 2009 interview, Sonia talked about how being incarcerated made her feel safe.
At one point, I was just so happy to be away. You know, and I know that sounds really, really messed up, but there was just some point where I was just away from all that, and I was by myself, and I was safe.
Investigators, on the other hand, said they knew about the sexual abuse allegations, but didn't have concrete evidence at the time to follow up on the case. Immediately, both kids were charged with first-degree murder and were tried as adults in the same year. The kids agreed to plead guilty to the charge of second-degree murder and were each sentenced to 18 years in prison with lifelong probation. Curtis reportedly asked if he could bring his Nintendo with him after he was sentenced. Curtis, who is now an ordained minister in prison, and Catherine, who got married to a pen pal, were both released from prison in 2015. 8. Aiden Fucci.
This was not done out of greed. It was not done in retaliation, retribution, or revenge. It was not a crime of passion. It was not a crime that was committed because he felt rejected by her.
The judge continued by describing why the defendant had committed the crime he was in court for.
It was not done in a fit of uncontrollable anger. There was no reason. There was no purpose. It was done for no other reason than to satisfy this defendant's internal desire to feel what it was like to kill someone.
Aiden Fucci was just 14 years old when he committed a crime that was so brutal that he had to be tried as an adult. On the morning of Mother's Day, May 9, 2021, the family of Tristan Bailey, a 13-year-old cheerleader, reported her missing after she failed to come help prepare breakfast for her mother. Before the day ended, her body was discovered in a wooded area outside of Jacksonville. She had been brutally stabbed 114 times, with 49 of her injuries being defensive stab wounds. The killer would later turn out to be Aiden Fucci, Tristan's classmate. He was shown on surveillance video walking at 1:10 a.m. with Tristan before she was declared missing. After several interrogations in which he contradicted himself a lot, he was arrested on May 10, 2021 for the second-degree murder of Tristan Bailey before the charge was upgraded to first-degree murder. Investigators also found the sheath of a buck knife which matched the one found near the victim's body, as well as bloody white Nike shoes and a t-shirt with blood on it. It was revealed that Fucci had always had an obsession with killing people with a pair of knives he had weirdly named Picker and Poker, and Tristan happened to be his victim. On March 24, 2023, 16-year-old Fucci, after being tried as an adult, appeared in court for sentencing.
Mr. Fucci, having entered a plea of guilty to the crime of first-degree murder, I adjudicate you guilty of the premeditated first-degree murder of Tristan Bailey. I sentence you to life in prison. Because of your age, you are eligible for a review of the sentence in 25 years.
Judge R. Lee Smith sentenced him to life in prison 9. Christian Fernandez.
He was sitting like this, and then how did you do his legs so we can understand happen? Like this. Did you hear pop?
Well, sort of.
Christian Fernandez was just 12 years old when he was charged as an adult with the first-degree murder of his 2-year-old half-brother in March 2011. This conviction made him the youngest person to be charged as an adult in the history of Jacksonville. On March 14, 2011, 2-year-old David Galarraga was left under the supervision of his older half-brother, Christian Fernandez, at their Jacksonville home in Florida. While the details of what really happened that day have continued to change, one fact remained the same. When their mother, Bianella Susana, returned, Christian took her to meet the younger child child who was unconscious and unresponsive. Instead of dialing 911 or taking him to the hospital, she simply changed the child's clothes, put ice on his head, and wiped off blood from his face. This was a rather unsettling behavior, especially after knowing that Christian had broken David's leg while wrestling just months before. Bianella later claimed that she thought the child had a mere concussion and would wake up eventually. During the more than 4 hours she waited, she took her time surfing the internet to do some online banking, watch music videos on YouTube, and read some stories about David and Victoria Beckham. She also checked her email and even did some web searches, which included the phrase "when someone gets knocked out." She visited a website about concussions multiple times and also visited the Wikipedia page for coma. Despite all of these, she wasn't moved to take the still unresponsive David to the hospital. By the time she eventually did, David's injuries had gotten so grave that he died 2 days later. The toddler had suffered a skull fracture caused by blunt force trauma, a subdural hematoma, subdural hemorrhage, and bruising on the bridge of his nose and the left eye. According to prosecutors, Fernandez had beaten him badly and struck his head and face against a bookshelf more than a dozen times. Further investigation showed that Fernandez had grown up in an extremely abusive home, which many believed led to him snapping. That same day, Fernandez was arrested and indicted with an aggravated child abuse charge. However, it was upgraded to first-degree murder on June 3, 2011. Despite knowing about his abusive childhood, Fernandez was tried as an adult, which meant that if he was found guilty of the charge against him, he would be sentenced to prison for the rest of his life without parole. In 2013, Fernandez pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of manslaughter and received a juvenile sanction, which meant he would remain in juvenile jail until January 2018, when he turned 19. He would have served 7 years on the manslaughter charge before he would be released from prison. 10. Derek and Alex King.
I do not believe that they were capable of doing such a heinous crime as this.
The crime, beating to death a man as he slept. The alleged killers, the man's own 2 sons, Derek and Alex King.
The murder of Terry King by his 2 children, 13-year-old Derek and 12-year-old Alex King, was one of the most controversial cases to hit the nation. While some people believed the kids' action was the result of being raised in a toxic environment with deadbeat parents, others thought they were just heartless killers. On November 26, 2001, Terry King was asleep when his sons, Derek and Alex, beat him to death with an aluminum baseball bat. His head had been seriously bashed in with such brutal force that his blood was splattered 12 feet across the room. To conceal their crime, they decided to set fire to their home in Cantonment, Florida, and fled the scene. Ricky Chavis, a family friend, hid the boys in his trailer home and also attempted to conceal evidence of their crime by washing the blood off their clothes. Investigators who visited the crime suspected foul play, and that was when both brothers confessed their crimes. According to them, their father had been mentally abusive and would often spank and stare down at them. Unfortunately, they changed their testimony countless times, at first saying they murdered their father on their own, before claiming that Chavis had convinced them to kill him. Later, they said that Chavis was the one who had murdered Terry King and convinced them to take the fall. You may be wondering why Ricky Chavis played such an essential role in their life. Derek and Alex King claimed that Chavis gave them all the attention and treats they didn't get at home. Alex also testified that he had been having sexual relations with Chavis. A trial was held for both King brothers, who were tried as adults, and Chavis, who was still a suspect in the crime. Chavis was acquitted while the brothers were convicted of second-degree murder on September 6, 2002. However, the judge overruled this conviction because he believed that the boys' right to due process was violated. In November 2002, both boys pleaded guilty to third-degree murder. Derek, who is now 14 years old, was sentenced to 8 years in prison to be paroled after 7 years. Alex, on the other hand, was sentenced to 7 years in prison to be paroled after 6 years. Chavis, however, was sentenced to 35 years in prison, despite being acquitted of the murder and molestation charges against him for being an accessory to murder and tampering with evidence. Derek, at the age of 20, was released from prison on March 7, 2009, while Alex, now 18, was released from custody on April 9, 2008. Cases involving murder, especially when carried out violently, can be very shocking, and finding out that the perpetrator is a young child is even more nerve-wracking. This video of 10 kids whose crimes were so brutal they were tried as adults shows that childhood isn't always wrapped in innocence. Even the cutest smile can hide the cruelest intentions. If you enjoyed this video, click on the card showing on your screen for more intriguing videos like this.